But if you were to set up, say, even a standing maritime headquarters, where you identify a problem, you ask for around 4 or 5 vessels, maybe the regional countries because they're close by and you don't sort of get into the tyranny of geography, to form a small sort of a task force, flying the blue ensign, and you nip that problem in the bud.
Blue economy is a multi-trillion dollar potential for India, and we have to work really hard. And I'm very happy that the current government has actually begun to focus on this whole Sagarmala and the idea of a coastal-led development for India. I think we've neglected the coasts, the maritime space for too long. So it's a completely unexplored potential. If we are going up to space, we need to go down to the oceans.
So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of WM Dialogues. I'm delighted to have as my guest today Ambassador Pankaj Saran, my previous boss, in fact, in the NSCS. Ambassador Saran already needs no introduction, but let me attempt to do the same. He's been an astute diplomat, has been part of the PMO in his earlier years, I think done several years over there, if I'm not mistaken, sir. Been our ambassador in Bangladesh, and then finally retired when he was our ambassador in Moscow.
Yeah.
Thereafter, a very short break after that, but his services could not be sort of done away with, so he joined the NSCS as the Deputy NSA SAS, where I happened to be a part of your organization for some of that period. So it was a delightful time, in fact, really over there. And after he left, then has become the convener of NatStrat.
Correct.
Which is a think tank and engaged in a lot of fascinating work that they're doing, operating out of Delhi. And along with that, become a member of the National Security Advisory Board. So you've got quite a handful, I think, sir, right now. Sir. So today I thought, sir, we'll discuss on the political side of maritime engagement in the regions, because I think that's something that is critically important to us. And in that, I thought, firstly, let me just lay out the landscape that we have the Indian Ocean, which is 70 million square kilometers. So it's a vast expanse. The third largest ocean after the Pacific and the Atlantic. And I think what is unique about this ocean, firstly, is that it straddles all major trade routes. So it's critical in that sense. The other thing I think that is quite unique is that it's largely, we have a large number of nations over here which are short on capacity and capabilities. Just to give you one short example, so if you, I always bring up this example of Mauritius. I mean, not to undermine them in any way, because it's almost a developed nation today. But if you were to compare Mauritius with India, Mauritius has an area of 2,040 square kilometers. We are 3.2 million square kilometers, 1,500 times their size. Their population is around 1.3 million. We are 1.4 billions, more than 1,000 times their size. But when it comes to the exclusive economic zone, we are both roughly at 2.3 million square kilometers. So when we are challenged in sort of policing our EEZs, you can just imagine the scale of the issue that a country like Mauritius has. And Mauritius is only the tip of the iceberg. If you see Seychelles, EEZ 1.37 million square kilometers, population 130,000 people.
Yeah.
I mean, Maldives marginally better, so with a population of roughly 600,000 people and a EEZ of roughly 1 million square kilometers. So this area is, I would say, has not got adequate capabilities, and therefore it opens itself up either to the increase of maritime crime of various sorts, or it opens it up for collaboration with external players in that space. So when we look at maritime policing and maritime security, it's at many levels. One is at the global level, one is at the regional level, and one is at the sub-regional levels. So I thought, let's start with the global levels. I mean, there's one critique that the ultimate global sort of organization is the United Nations. And one critique of the UN is that they are sea blind, and that the effort that they devote towards policing the seas is minuscule. Would you like to talk about that, sir, in that sense?
Yeah. Well, firstly, Monty, it's a great pleasure to be here with you. We've had many years of association, and I must congratulate you on starting this podcast on maritime. I think it's critical sitting in Goa to raise awareness about India's maritime personality because we have too focused on the continental. So, congratulations to
Thank you, sir.
taking this lead forward. But on the governance aspect, oceans was considered to be a global good, and we spent many years, the international community, trying to create rules of the road for governance. And so you had the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which was a binding document. It was an international legal treaty associated with many other treaty frameworks. The whole idea was to delineate what you just described is the EEZ, the continental shelf, the respective rights and responsibilities, so that you can have a legal arrangement on how to govern this common space. Unfortunately, the treaty or the convention UNCLOS has worked in parts but not in others, and it is still in very much work in progress. India was a part of it, so you had the convention, then you had tribunals, you had legal bodies which would address maritime disputes, which would address legal matters which could not be resolved bilaterally between countries, between littoral states. So I think everyone understood that you needed to have a international arrangement. So for starters, that was not a bad initiative at all. But over time, what has happened is that the maritime space, the oceans have again and are becoming areas of contestation. So you have interstate contestations, which are more strategic in nature between countries to create spheres of influence. But you also have issues relating to policing and crime and maritime transnational crime. I think both of these require different approaches to resolve. Um, and I'm not sure whether we have enough legal arrangements. For example, in the early 2000s, you had this problem of piracy off the coast of Somalia, which was basically driven from the failure of states to govern themselves on land. And so the international response to combating piracy, which had, multiplier effects on trade and insurance, was suboptimal. It was basically a coalition of the willing who decided to combat piracy. Uh, of late, again, you solved that problem to a large extent. You had a United Nations arrangement, which was loose. But now you're into things like fishing problems, drug trafficking, human trafficking. I don't know whether we have enough legal arrangements multilaterally. Um, and of course, now you also, as you are familiar, have similar problems on the poles, on both the Arctic and the Antarctic. So we are at a spot where the focus on the maritime is growing, competition for resources, for influence, for protecting your sea lines of communication. They're all growing as more and more powers emerge. Global trade rises, transnational crime grows in complexity and sophistication. You have grey shipping apart from white shipping and black shipping. So I think, and then you have the whole environmental challenge. There is a lot of move towards a plastic-free oceans. The whole blue economy framework is also now occupying a lot of attention. So, on balance, I would say we are, because of climate change challenges, because of rising interstate tensions and ungoverned spaces, the oceans are becoming, at a broad macro level, a very important area for international security, and maritime disputes have always been there, but in some cases depends on the region. I mean, you mentioned the Indian Ocean, we can talk about that. It depends on which region you're talking of, but maritime disputes have become salient. So that's the situation as far as the oceans are concerned.
So, if I can uh, I fully agree with you, sir, regarding on the piracy issue. I happen to have a ringside view of that because at that time I was the naval attaché in DC, and that's where in the UN all the action really started with the setting up of the contact group on combating piracy
Yeah.
of the Horn of Africa, the CGPCS that was set up at that time. But what transformed, so if you see, was you rightly mentioned, a very inefficient way of solving the problem. You had a large number of people who came in. There was initially no centralized control. Each was off doing their own thing.
Yeah.
There was no coordination on areas to patrol. Each came in with their own rules of engagement. There was so with time, of course, the shade mechanism was set up, etc. The shared
Yeah.
awareness and deconfliction mechanism that operated out of Bahrain. But even then, it took a long time to sort of settle into some semblance of a coordinated operations. But then, even then, ships would come flying their own ensign with, under operating under national laws. Uh, but this is in sharp contrast to, say, another mission like the UNIFIL mission, so which is happening, which is still, in fact, an ongoing mission where you have ships which are assigned, which fly a blue ensign, and which are therefore, the command and control structure, what they can do, what they can't do, etc., is quite well set out. The advantage of that sort of an approach is that you dehyphenate, I would say, your national politics from what is essentially a maritime security mission. And if you disengage these two, then I think you become a lot more efficient in the way you can sort of handle an issue. For instance, I'm not saying that the UN needs to set up a standing maritime task force. I mean, that's asking for too much. But if you were to set up, say, even a standing maritime headquarters, where you identify a problem, you ask for around 4 or 5 vessels, maybe the regional countries because they're close by and you don't sort of get into the tyranny of geography, to form a small sort of a task force, flying the blue ensign, and you nip that problem in the bud instead of waiting for it to build up to a certain level and then come together. So I agree that for nations to do this, to come together, is not an easy thing to do. But I think certainly maybe moving ahead, that might be a better approach to these sort of problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you're saying is aspirational, and but the point is that if you look at the experience of the United Nations as an institution and it's all these bodies, basically it has fallen victim to great power politics, to regional interests, to states trying to compete and confront each other, and therefore the powerful and the mighty get their sway. The littoral states, which are weak, as you mentioned, fragile, limited capacity, they are either used as part of this big power politics, or fall by the wayside, or become victims of crimes emanating from the seas and the oceans. And so, unfortunately, the experience so far doesn't make me feel very optimistic
Right.
about,
So,
what you're saying.
so let's come down to the Indian Ocean, sir, then, because that's a region that is of critical to us. And in the Indian Ocean, of course, I would say there are two approaches you can mention regarding, regional collaboration. One is the larger institutions that you have, like IONS and IORA, I think, are the two fundamentally large institutions, which are quite open to membership to whoever in the region wants to become a member. And plus, you have some extra regional observers also who join these institutions. The other is the smaller, tighter institutions, Colombo Security Conclave or BIMSTEC, and which are sub-regional organizations. The advantage, I would say, in sub-regional organizations is that whenever nations collaborate together, I think you come down to the least common denominator. And therefore, the larger the nations, the less you can sort of agree upon. And therefore, that becomes, a limiting factor in what you can do. And therefore, if you want to do something more substantial, I think the smaller groups tend to be slightly more effective
Yeah.
in doing that. What would be your comments on that?
No, in principle, a plurilateral group, which is small, is exclusive, it's not inclusive, but it's more efficient. But at the end of the day, its reach is limited. It's focused on a particular region or a set of issues. But yes, I mean, if you have a homogeneous approach among its members, then naturally it has more teeth. But in the Indian Ocean, I think what we need to do, you see, Indian Ocean, we do not have a regional architecture for security. In fact, I don't know whether in any ocean you have a regional architecture which is maritime focused for governance of security. So you have a multi-layered approach. None of these organizations are legally binding. None of them are international treaties. They're basically voluntary frameworks in which states have accepted that we identify these priority areas. So the IONS, for example, was an initiative of the Indian Navy, again going back to the early 2000s.
Yes.
It's grown very well. IORA, of course, is a different organization with its own personality. You have the Indian Ocean Commission, as you know,
Yeah.
the French-led
Yeah.
off the east coast of Africa. And so these are all complementary to each other. But we, of course, and if you remember in the few decades ago, during the height of the Cold War, the Sri Lankans were pushing heavily for this idea of declaring the Indian Ocean as a zone of peace.
Right.
And that idea was to keep the major powers, the superpowers, away. But what was the history of the Indian Ocean? The history of the Indian Ocean was that both the Americans and the Soviets at that time, they wanted to come in and make the Indian Ocean another theater for their
Contestation.
geopolitical
Yeah.
rivalry. India was always uncomfortable because, for very good reasons, we preferred to deal with the littoral states and the Indian Ocean on our own and create our own architecture rather than allow external powers to come and create further tensions. Now, of course, with the rise of the Chinese Navy and Chinese power, the Russians are not so much present, but it's more the Chinese and the Americans and the French and so on. But nevertheless, our own capacities have grown significantly. Not enough, but grown significantly. So what we have done is, for example, as you said, picked up sub-regions of the Indian Ocean and decided to create these groupings, which are moving at different speeds. But they are better than nothing. So ideally, of course, and even within, let's say, BIMSTEC or the Colombo Security Conclave, we have situations where we have bilateral maritime disputes among members. But still, the organization, whether it's BIMSTEC or the Colombo Security Conclave or anything else, can succeed only to the extent that there is convergence among members and a political consensus that, look, we want to do this. So you start small, you build trust, you pick up the easier areas, oil spills, pollution, drug trafficking, human trafficking. These are non-controversial. They don't challenge sovereignty of states. And since in the Indian Ocean there is this problem of fragility and prickly sovereignties, you have to move slowly and carefully to gain the trust, also to build some degree of, let's say, standards in whether it's SOPs or other forms of interoperability between coast guards, between the navies, even between ports. If you remember, and I see that it's happening.
I think just today or yesterday,
Yeah,
the
the
BIMSTEC
ports conclave.
Yeah,
It's a
BIMSTEC
fantastic
conference.
idea. I mean, you just get all the port operators off the east coast of it, on the eastern flank, to talk to each other on safety, on security, on protocols, because frankly, you have to do it yourself. So all of these are actually very good, and I think India has to and must take the lead not because we are big, but because we have relatively greater capacity, greater experience, and we can also learn from the other countries, and we should. But I think in terms of leadership, we should, and I hope we do more of whatever we are doing. We have our own work cut out, you know. We have our own deep sea, deep ocean mission. We have a huge continental shelf and so on to develop. But still, we should take the lead in moving all these things forward in a collective, congenial manner. I mean, the HADR 2004 tsunami was, in my view, the first initiative taken by India. It was a self-selected group of 4 countries and accepted by everyone.
which was the foundation of the Quad in a sense.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So, sir, I mean, agree with everything you say, but sometimes what happens when it comes to the near abroad, while you might have a lot of interdependencies that you have with them, but with changing administrations at times, you'll find quite sharp undulations in the political engagement that takes place. How do we ride these out? So
You
what would
just
you
live
say?
with them. You just live with them because, you know, you cannot control internal political developments in your neighbors. Uh, I mean, they are small, they are relatively new nation states, very fragile economies, underdeveloped institutions. Uh, Transfer of power in them historically has been uh, either violent or unpredictable or subject to political extremes. So you have to be fully with your eyes open, understand what you're dealing with. These are not, I mean, even Europe, for example, they went through upheavals for hundreds of years before they figured out that the nation state is the way to go. So if that is the kind of neighborhood you have, and if you cannot control what's happening inside them, then you just have to be prepared to deal with crises, maybe one or maybe multiple simultaneously, or in some situations where, you know, the pieces fall nicely, that you have a stable, predictable, friendly government to deal with. But don't take it for granted. So be prepared for the good days and the bad.
Right. And then, sir, I would say finally, maybe if we can discuss a little about, of course, the biggest change that is happening in this part of the ocean is the increasing, I would say, footprint of China's. So far, you've seen it largely, I would say, in the infrastructure sort of space, port development, shipping, etc. Now you're seeing signs of securitization of that infrastructure as well. So, I mean, they've already got a base in Djibouti. You've got a reasonable number of grey hulls that hang around here now, and I think it's only a matter of time before you find more and more bases will spring up because China's got a problem, sir. I mean, in the end of the day, they have an Indian Ocean dilemma, and we have a unique geography where we share a common border, but from a maritime standpoint, we're around 4 or 5,000 miles apart, depending on which strait you take. So for a naval force to operate on extended lines like that is complex, and the only way you can sort of mitigate that complexity is by setting up bases inside the area. And you're seeing that sign of, I would say, influence building and some degree of contestation which is happening in our immediate peripheries. How do we deal with this?
Look, it's very difficult to deal with this kind of a situation because there is a mismatch of resources. China has much deeper pockets than we have. It has great power ambitions. So when it is spreading its wings across the oceans, Indian Ocean, in terms of port infrastructure and other connectivities, the maritime routes and this and that, it's playing a bigger game, and that game is vis-a-vis the United States. So it is trying to assert it's trying to use the Indian Ocean also as part of its the Pacific and the eastern flank in its broader, bigger, larger, what it sees as a more long-term competition for global influence with the United States. Now, You can either match them at the risk of strategic overreach, or you have to find and you have to develop, or you develop your own internal domestic capabilities to the best of your ability, or you harness your own equities, geography, cultural linkages, historical identities within your immediate periphery,
Right.
because those can't be wished away.
That's
Those
right.
are for real. No China can replace the bonds between you and your neighbors. Those bonds are civilizational. The geographical realities exist. The Chinese can't change geography. So you have to then leverage your economic strengths, your capabilities, your historical and cultural affinities. And lastly, of course, you have to find external partners to the extent that they're willing to work with you and they add to your own national goals and objectives. But it's a double-edged sword because no one is going to come in for free to help you. Everyone comes with an agenda.
Right.
But these are the only ways. I mean,
But as long as you have maybe, if your interests are aligned, if there are greater alignments, then maybe you can take forward those alignments even with the external partners. I mean, in specific
I
areas.
think that's what we have been doing in the last 10, 20 years,
Yes.
that we have been trying to develop partnerships, which we never had before. I mean, if you look at India of even till the 80s and the 90s, you did not have the kind of partnerships you have today. So I think in the post-Soviet era, the post-1991 era, or let us say in the last 20 years, after China really took off from the early 2000s, last 20 years, uh, that has already generated an impetus here in India and among others to work together, because everyone understands, whether it's in Australia or a Japan or a France or a UK, that you can't really do it alone. And so that's the new framework that is unfolding as we speak. The only thing is that India, as the resident power, has to guide and shape the nature and the direction of such a coalition to ensure that it doesn't run away and hijack your own interests.
So I think there was a very nice statement made by the late Mr. K. Subramaniam, where he said that strategic autonomy should not be confused with strategic restraint. You know, I think which captures what partially what you're trying to say, sir, over here. So, with that, sir, I think we're running out of time. Anything else you'd like to add for our viewers, sir?
No, I think what you're saying is good. I think the blue economy, I will just last thoughts. The blue economy is a multi-trillion dollar potential for India. And we have to work really hard. And I'm very happy that the current government has actually begun to focus on this whole Sagarmala and the idea of a coastal led development for India. I think we've neglected the coasts, the maritime space for too long. So it's a completely unexplored potential. If you're going up to space, we need to go down to the oceans. And I think there is huge, huge potential. There's also risk, as we have just discussed. But let's also focus on the massive potential. It has everything that you need for the next few decades. We should really focus on that.
So it remains for me to thank you, sir, for
Thank you.
sparing your time and coming and spending this evening over here. And I hope you've had a pleasant stay in Goa.
Yeah.
And have many such visits so that you give me many more opportunities to have a conversation like this again. So,
Thank you, Monty. Great, great pleasure to be here in this wonderful place. And it's always a pleasure to come to Goa. And you're doing great work. Continue it. And I wish all success to you.
thank you so much.